Have you ever wanted to try digital art but you just didn't know where to start? Maybe you're a traditional artist who wants to try something new, or you've never done any art before and digital art looks like a good place to start. Well, you're in the right place. We've all been there, and it can be really intimidating to start doing something that's entirely new to you. But I'm here to try and make it a little less scary and a little bit more accessible. I tried digital art seriously for the first time late last year in 2022. I started with a very illustrative style and kind of developed from there. My only experience with digital art before that was Photoshop CS2, maybe Photoshop Elements 2. When I was 14 or 15 to try cell shading drawings that I'd done, I was using a mouse, didn't have a tablet or anything like that, and this was the result, and I hadn't touched it again since then. Do let me know if you'd like to see me do a redraw of this one. It's been a while. I've changed a little bit. I'm pretty new to digital art myself. I've learned a few tricks and useful things along the way that I wanted to share with you. This video will be split into 2 parts and then more parts within those parts. So here are the timestamps if you want to find anything specific, and they will also be in the description so you can get to what you need to see the most. This video is mostly aimed at beginners and mainly focuses on Procreate because that is what I use. There's a lot of useful tips that might help out other artists as well, so stick around and learn something new. So this video will be split into 2 major parts. So part 1 will be getting started, which will be basics for absolute beginners. So if you have never touched digital art before, this part is for you. I will cover all the basics you need to know to get started. And part number 2 will be quickfire tips, and it'll be a bunch of tips and tricks that you might not know, regardless of where you are in your digital art journey. So let's start from the very beginning. How do you choose a program or an app that you want to use to create digital art? So here are a few options that are really popular. So number 1, Photoshop. You may have heard a lot of artists use Photoshop to create their digital art. It's a great option and it's incredibly popular, but it is very expensive because you need to pay a subscription for it. Apart from my experience with other versions of Photoshop when I was much younger, I have no experience creating art in Photoshop. But I do know that it is an amazing tool if you take the time to learn all the features and the tools that it has and have the money to pay for it. Next is Clip Studio Paint. Clip Studio Paint was the very first digital art platform that I tried. I got myself a Galaxy Book 2 as a much needed laptop upgrade, and it came with the S Pen. So I figured, let's try digital art, what could possibly go wrong? I'd always wanted to try digital art, but I was a little intimidated in getting started and getting into it. But I had half the materials, so I decided to try the free trial that Clip Studio Paint had available at the time, and I gave it a go. When I first tried Clip Studio Paint, I tried to emulate my traditional watercolor style that I was used to using because that is what I was primarily working on before. And I found it worked surprisingly well to help me get used to the program and the functionality and the things that it can do. So I would definitely recommend that if you are a beginner who's come from a traditional medium. Try recreating your traditional style on this digital program. You'll learn a lot in the process of doing so. It can be a really good way to get used to the program and the way things work within it. I ended up liking Clip Studio Paint so much that I ended up paying for the one-time purchase that, again, they had available at the time. It is no longer available. I believe it is now a fully subscription program, but I used it for about 3 or 4 months and I had every intention of staying with it forever. I really loved it. I love the functionality. I think it's a great program. If you want a video on that, I can do one. Let me know. The interface for Clip Studio Paint is very similar to what I know of Photoshop, and it has some great features along with the asset store where you can download new brushes, textures and extra tools that will help you. Clip Studio Paint is also absolutely the best option if you create comics or webcomics because it is specifically designed for that and has tools that will help you create them. Ibis Paint. I've never used Ibis Paint before, but I've seen people create some absolutely fantastic work with it. It's a free app and it is available on most programs, which makes it a really accessible way to get into digital art. It has a lot of features and tools, and a lot of the tips that I will discuss today can also be used there. And Procreate, which I'm sure if you're watching this you already know about. Procreate is my go-to digital art app now, and to be honest, that kind of happened as a mistake. I really wanted to be able to bring my art around with me when I was traveling, and Clip Studio and my laptop just wasn't quite as portable as I would like. So I saved up and got an iPad mini with the intention of using it with Procreate whenever I wanted to travel with my art, kind of like a digital sketchbook. It turns out I ended up liking Procreate so much that I stopped using Clip Studio Paint altogether. I'm slowly saving up to upgrade my iPad mini to an iPad Pro because the tiny screen on the iPad mini is really difficult to work with. Procreate has a very minimal and simple interface, making it really easy to use if you're a beginner, but you still have access to loads of tools and extra things that will help you with your art. Procreate is an excellent tool and it's super affordable if you already have an iPad, but it is limited to the Apple ecosystem. It only works on Apple products, so that can be quite limiting if you're not someone who uses Apple products. The tips and tricks that I'll be talking about today are for Procreate, but they will work with other apps as well. And here are some honorable mentions that I've had other people recommend to me that make really great apps for starters and more experienced people. So when you first open Procreate, you'll be hit with this page, but blank. And the first thing that you'll need to do is create a canvas. I usually work with an A3 canvas size, but if you like to work with a lot of layers, I would recommend an A4 or a smaller canvas because Procreate does have layer limits, which I will cover a little bit later. For those of you who know nothing about digital art, using more layers gives you much more room for changing things in the middle of a drawing. I don't tend to work this way anymore, but it is a lot more forgiving and much easier to fix mistakes or change parts in the drawing process. So on layer limits, the less powerful your iPad, the less layers you'll have available to work with because your iPad just can't handle it. And that amount of layers will go down as your canvas size increases. So if you want a really big canvas, you're gonna have very few layers that you can work with, whereas if you have a really small canvas, you can use way more layers. But I prefer big canvas, less layers. Using an iPad mini forced me to adapt and learn to use much less layers because I know I prefer a bigger canvas, and the iPad mini is not a very powerful iPad. But quite simply, the bigger the canvas, the less risk of pixelization, and the more detail you get, and the better it will print if you want to print it. So let's make our canvas.
You can delete or edit existing canvases by just swiping to the left, which is very convenient to make a list that you want. So the first thing you need to do is tap the plus and then tap the plus again. And if you tap on an untitled canvas, you can rename your canvas. I've gone with A3 because it's easy to find in the future. So these are the dimensions that you need for an A3 canvas, if that's what you want to make. Don't feel you have to, but like I mentioned earlier, it's what I prefer. I don't want to be compromising on quality if I try to print the piece. So the next important thing to know about is DPI. A good rule of thumb is that 72 is great for online if you don't want people downloading your artwork, 150 is great for high resolution online, and use 300 if you ever want to print it. At the bottom here you can see the maximum layers for this canvas, and that depends upon the dimensions you use. So the next option is color profile. I like to leave this as it is, it's worked really well for me, but if you have problems with the color looking different when you print, here is where you need to change things. And if you want colors that are really close to print accurate, pick the CYMK option. Next is time-lapse settings, and this will decide the quality of the time-lapse video that Procreate records of your art process. I leave mine at default because my iPad can't handle any more than that, but if you want a high quality time-lapse, be sure to change this in the canvas settings as you cannot change it later. You can bet I learned that the hard way. And finally we have canvas properties, which I leave as it is because this one you can change later in the process. So once you're happy with those settings, tap Create, and this will create the canvas for you to work on and also save those settings so that you can select them again in the future.
The next step is to choose your brushes, and there are so many default brush options in Procreate, and honestly I think it's the best selection of default brushes available in any digital art program. But that range can be super overwhelming if you don't know where to start. I know when I first started, as I was primarily a watercolour artist before I tried digital art, I gravitated towards the watercolour brushes in Clip Studio Paint at the time. And I was so disappointed when they didn't work in the way that I expected them to, and I found that very discouraging. And that experience put me off of using digital art for a good while, and I really don't want you guys to feel that, so I'm here to try and demystify the process. The way I deal with the overwhelming brush choice is that I will choose a few favourites that I'll use most of the time. I like to avoid using too many of the specialised brushes in my artwork because I find that it makes the art look really busy and it makes me a lot less intentional with the brush choices that I make. However, that's not to say that it can't work, because I created this amethyst dragon piece using a lot of different texture brushes and types of brushes, and it's proved to be quite a popular piece. Anyway, the first thing that you're going to need is a pencil brush. There are so many options within the sketching section of the Procreate brush selector, but I like 6B pencil if you want a pencil that feels pretty similar to a real pencil. Technical pencil is a great one that if you are used to using mechanical pencils for traditional drawing. And you can use peppermint if you're the kind of person who likes to shade with the side of your pencil. My personal favourite pencil brush, after trying so many different ones, is the Sketch Round brush from the Jing Sketch Basics brush set, which I will link down below if you are interested in getting that. I'll link to any non-default brushes that I mentioned in this video in the description below if you want to check them out for yourself. Once you've chosen a pencil brush, you can also select a brush for your eraser, and yes, you can pick from any of your brushes. I tend to stick to either the soft shade brush from the Lowish Patreon brush pack, or just the hard blend airbrush, which I think it selects by default. But a lot of people prefer to play around with this and choose something maybe a little more textured, like one of the charcoal brushes, for a more realistic feel. A useful trick that you might like, if you're drawing with a specific brush and you want to use the eraser that's the same shape, just tap and hold on the eraser and it will use the brush that you're currently using. You can also do this with the smudge tool. I've spent a lot of time curating my brush collection and I finally feel happy with it, and I have most of the brushes that I want to use, so I wanted to share some of my favourites with you. So first we have Sketch Round from the Jing Sketch Basics brush pack. Gloaming, which is a default brush and I like to use for like hair details. Soft Shade, which is from Lowish's Patreon brush set, but it's just like a slightly modified standard round brush. Halftone, I don't know where I got it, but it is a halftone brush. Loose Hatch, which was from Sam Does Art's Patreon brush pack, and the Textured Hatch, also from the same pack. The Sanadorable watercolour brush pack is one of my very favourite watercolour brush packs, and also the Digital Art Junkie watercolour brush pack and their Basics brush pack are both absolutely fantastic. I will leave links to all of these in the description, although some of them are Patreon exclusive, but you can find others that are similar online if that's something you're interested in. You can get so many different types of brushes online, even some that are super specific, but I tend to stick to these ones. Otherwise I feel like I'm not really learning, and I love to learn while I create. I'd rather learn to draw hair in my style than use a brush that just is designed to paint hair, and I never learned how to paint hair. So you've downloaded a bunch of new brush packs that you really like the look of, but how do you add them to Procreate? Well, there are two ways you can do this.
So option 1, tap on the plus in the brush library and then tap import. Then simply find the brush set file in your files and tap on that. Easy as that, and that'll be imported usually as an extra list. So I'll delete that one and show you the other way you can do it. So go to your files on your iPad and find the brush set file wherever you've stored it. Mine are a mess, and just tap on it, and it's easy as that. It is so easy to import a brush into Procreate. And now you'll be importing so many brushes into Procreate for yourself. And while we're on the topic of brushes, let's talk organizing. So the way that I've organized mine is I've duplicated any folder and then move it to where I want it. So I put it at the top so it's easier to find. Then rename it favorites or my best brushes or something like that you're going to remember. And then just delete everything in there that isn't one of those favorite brushes, which could be everything. You can highlight them all just by swiping quickly to the right and then tap delete at the top. And then anytime I find a brush that I know that I'm going to use a lot, I'll just duplicate it and then drag it into the folder. It can be really finicky. I don't know if there's an easier way to do that. But there we are, and now you have your list of favorite brushes, and honestly it's a lifesaver because the list of brushes on Procreate can be really overwhelming. I also really like to save brush sizes, which is super easy to do. So once you found a size that you like, just tap on that and tap the plus, and that will save that size, so you can really easily jump back to it if you need to.
The first useful thing to know when it comes to colour in Procreate is how to colour pick. All you need to do is tap and hold on a colour, and then when this icon comes up, you can drag your finger to exactly the colour that you want to colour pick. The colour on the bottom of this circle is the colour you originally had selected, and the one on the top is what you're colour picking. If you want to pick a whole new colour to work with, that is where the colour palette comes in. So tap your little dot of colour in the top right to open it. Mine might look a little different to yours. Larger iPads has an extra row for colour history, which can be super useful. So at the bottom here you can see 5 options. And I think most people find the one that they like the most and stick with it, and I tend to stick with the classic palette and the palettes page. So the disc is exactly what it sounds like. It is a disc. You can choose your hue around the edges, and in the middle is your brightness and your saturation. Classic is what I was used to seeing on Photoshop, so it's the one I'm most comfortable with. You have this large square of brightness and saturation, but also 3 sliders, one for hue, one for brightness, and one for saturation, and I find it so much easier to fine-tune colours in this option. Harmony is brilliant for getting a really cohesive colour scheme in your art. You can see at the top here it says complementary, so if I choose purple, for example, it will show me its complementary colour. You can also change this to show you split complementary, so it'll show you 2 different complementary colours that also go well together. Analogous, which will show you colours near each other on the colour wheel, and triadic, which shows you 3, and tetradic for 4. Value I use very rarely and pretty much only to get the hex value of a colour. And finally, palettes is exactly what it says it is. You have a few pre-made colour palettes in here, but you can make your own or even import them from other creators who have made them. Keep watching for a fun trick to make your own special customized palette later on. The last part of this section for absolute beginners, I just want to talk about the different tools available to you in the layers section. So when you tap on any layer, you get this list. Rename obviously allows you to rename the layer. It's useful to keep things organized. I very often will forget, but it is really helpful. Select the pixels on the layer. So for example, if I have a line sketched down, it will only select the lines and nothing else. It's useful for if you want to change the color of the lines. If you've drawn them in black but you want them to be blue, very useful. Copy, again, obvious, copy's a layer. Fill layer, this fills the layer entirely. If you have anything on the layer, it will be gone. But you can use this in conjunction with alpha lock, change the color of everything on a layer. Clear clears the layer, obviously. Alpha lock locks all the pixels in a layer, so if this is selected, you cannot paint outside of the pixels that are already down. Sometimes I'll use this on my sketch layer and then use fill layer if I want to change the colour of the sketch lines. Mask creates a layer mask, which is a little more complicated if you're not used to it. This is a black and white layer attached to the layer, where white allows the drawing to be seen through it, but if you use black, it will hide it. I use this if I want to try redrawing the eye in a portrait, for example, but I don't want to erase the first attempt in case it was actually better, which happens a lot. But I can use a mask to cover it up, then a layer on top to draw my second attempt. Clipping mask, this is definitely my most used tool. This clips the layer to the pixels of the layer below. Invert inverts the colours, relatively self-explanatory. Reference, I have not used this, but it allows you to set a line art layer as a reference for the layers above it. So for example, I can draw this circle and set it as a reference layer. Then when I create a layer above it and fill the layer, it will stay within the reference lines, and this allows you to keep your line art layers separate if you draw in that way. Merge down merges the current layer with the layer below and turns them into one layer, and combine down creates a layer group with the layer below, keeping them separate but also together. I will explain that later. If you swipe left on a layer, you have 3 more options. Delete and duplicate are easy enough to understand. Lock will lock your layer and prevent you from editing it, and it can be really useful to stop yourself from accidentally rendering on the line art layer or the sketch layer, but I do always forget this feature exists and I never use it. I'm just going to briefly go through the blending modes that I use, but honestly I find them better to understand by just using them. I will link to an article that explains them a little bit better in the description below though. So for what I use, normal is obviously normal, nothing changes. Multiply is great for shading, as it makes the colour you're painting with darker but kind of semi-transparent, so you can still see everything below it. I occasionally use add for highlights, but it can look very blown out if you use it much. Soft light creates a layer of soft light, which looks great for highlight, and it's also a great way to add colour to grayscale, so you can paint colour over it with a soft light layer and you'll still be able to see values you've created in the layer. And that's pretty much all I use, so check out the description if you want to learn a little bit more about blending modes. I will link to that article. Now this is the fun part. I'm going to cover some tips and tricks that you may not know that are really useful and I think just fun to be aware of.
You may have seen before that I use a sketchbook canvas on Procreate. It's where I jot down my ideas or do warm-up exercises or even just expression and hand studies for practice. I've never been good at keeping a sketchbook, but this is like solved that problem for me. Anyway, this is how you make one. Make a new screen-sized canvas. This size allows you to maximize the number of layers available to you, and as it's a sketchbook, there's no need for it to be super high quality. Tap the spanner and open Actions. Go to Video and turn off the time-lapse if you want to save memory on your device, because it will be recording a lot if you leave it on. You can always turn it on for a specific drawing at a time, which is what I do. So go to the Canvas tab and turn on Page Assist. Now each layer or layer group is a separate page on your sketchbook. You can add new pages by tapping the plus in your layers palette, or tapping new page down at the bottom here where you'll see all your pages listed. Create a layer group, swipe right on each layer that you want in the group, and then just tap group. Layer groups allow you to edit each layer in the group separately, which is really useful if you have a really complex sketch. For example, you want to draw a background and a person, and it means you can edit each part separately and not have to worry about it. You can also rename any Procreate file by just tapping on the name. If you like to see statistics, you can actually see the time spent and strokes made on a canvas by opening Actions, Canvas, and then tap Canvas Information. Tap on Statistics right at the bottom and it's all right there. I think it's quite fun to see sometimes. I decided to make a little brush stamp with my signature/watermark so that I can stamp all of my work with it and create something easily recognizable, and I wouldn't have to write out my signature every single time. Here's how you can do the same for your own or for literally anything else you want to make a stamp of. So first, open a square canvas and draw your signature or whatever it is you want to turn into a stamp. Resize it so that it fills the canvas space. Then go to Actions, Add, and then select Copy Canvas. Next, go to Brushes and tap the plus to create a new brush. Go down to Shape and select Import and then Paste. Make sure that you tap it with 2 fingers to invert the colours, that is really important. Then tap Done. Go to Stroke Properties and increase the spacing all the way up. And then go down to Apple Pencil and turn the opacity all the way down. Go to Properties and increase the max size up to the top, and if you want to, you can turn on the stamp preview. Don't forget to rename your brush, because otherwise it's an untitled brush and that's no fun. And you're done. Stamp to your heart's content.
Do you have the perfect picture with just the most beautiful colour palette and you just want to be able to paint with those colours? Well, you can. You can actually turn that photo into a colour palette in Procreate by selecting the plus on your palettes page and import from photo, and it will turn your photo into a curated palette that you can use for your artwork.
There are some great shortcuts in Procreate, but if you don't already know them, they can take a while to find, so here are some of the ones that I use the most. You can tap with 2 fingers to undo. You can tap with 3 fingers to redo. That took me ages to find. Like, I'd accidentally undone something and I couldn't work out how to redo it. Tap with 4 fingers to hide the interface. And pinch really quickly to zoom in or out to your full canvas.
Do you have a reference that you want to use but you do not want it to be in your time-lapse video? Maybe it's a risque photo, or it's a photo of your kids that you just don't want on the internet. You can insert it into your canvas as a private photo by swiping left on Insert Photo.
While we're on the subject of references, you can use the reference window to see a thumbnail of your drawing so that you can zoom right in and get those details that no one will ever see. It acts as a thumbnail and stays zoomed out, and you can see kind of how your edit will affect the whole picture. I love it. You can also use this to add a reference image that you can just see on top without needing to use a split screen or to put it onto your canvas. Because let's be honest, a split screen on an iPad mini, I don't think so. You can move it about on top of the canvas, it doesn't affect your drawing in any way, and I think it's brilliant and not enough people know about it. Do you want your painting to look just a little bit more like a traditional painting and you want to add some of that crunchy paper texture? There are two ways you can do this. So find a texture that you like online. On your drawing, tap the spanner and on the Add tab, select Insert a File or Insert a Photo depending on where you've stored it. Find the texture you want to use and select it to import it, which will add it as a new layer. Resize it to cover your artwork completely and change the blending mode to multiply. You can also change the opacity if you want to as well. The second option works really well if you don't want to hunt for a texture online or you just can't find one that's quite right. So you want to make a new layer, choose a light colour and then select a textured brush. Choose a textured brush like this one under textures, but any will work. Colour the whole canvas with that brush. Then add a new layer below and choose a darker colour. Fill that layer and merge the two layers together either by pinching them or merge down like I mentioned earlier. Then set the blending mode for this layer to overlay, and you can also change the opacity on this one if you like as well. And I actually really love this effect and I've started using it a lot more.
I just wanted to add a couple of physical recommendations that I highly recommend when you want to draw with an iPad. I hated drawing with the standard Apple Pencil nib on the very slick fingerprint magnet iPad screen. So these are the two things that I would recommend if you want to feel a little bit more like you're actually drawing on paper. So first of all, you may have heard it, but the Paperlike screen protector. This is not sponsored at all. I bought this with my own money. I don't think they know I exist. I wish they did. I actually bought this immediately after buying the iPad because the screen was such a fingerprint magnet that I could not believe it, and I hated it so much. Now, the Paperlike brand is quite expensive, and I haven't tried any of the more affordable options, and I know there are some that you can remove that are removable, but I would say that the Paperlike one is absolutely worth the money. You get two in the pack, which apparently is for if you mess up installing the first one, but it went perfectly for me. But I found the installation really easy. Just be sure to watch their video. They go over everything you need to know to install your Paperlike screen protector properly. I'm holding onto the spare for when this one is too worn down. The only downside to this screen protector that I've found is that it can affect the way that your artwork looks through the iPad screen. I found that the matte texture can make it look as though there's added noise to your artwork, but I think it's worth it for the way it feels, and I find it a worthwhile price to pay. But I'll try and show you some close-ups to see what that looks like and how it looks a little different. And the second thing that I would highly recommend, and it took me a lot longer to decide on this, but eventually I decided that it was worth a go, is a metal tip Apple Pencil nib. It was around £10 for a pack of 2 from Amazon. I'll link the ones that I got in the description, and they work so great for me. First off, it just feels better to draw with. It gives you a much finer tip than the Apple Pencil, which is quite broad, but be aware that it's not always like perfectly calibrated, but it's pretty damn close, and I think it's worth it. The only con that I found for this is that it can scratch up the Paperlike screen protector, but it's not bad enough to stop me using it. I found that the benefits definitely outweigh the negatives for that. I wanted to do like a mini beginner's tutorial to paint something, but I did not want this video to go on for hours, so I'll end it here. July's video will be exactly that though, so let me know in the comments below what you would like to paint on Procreate along with me. Hi, this is Editing Rain here, just popping in to let you know that I have a Kickstarter coming up really soon, and I'm so excited about it. And if you want to be among the first to hear about it, please join my newsletter. The link is in the description. It's my very first Kickstarter, and I really hope it goes well. Thank you so much for sticking around this long. It means the world to me, and I hope you learned something that you can take away to do your own amazing artwork. And if you enjoyed this video and learned a little something, I would love if you would drop me a like and subscribe if you want to see more art related videos. Have the best day!